Welcome to Bleep Bulimia podcast with guest Jonathan McLernon, coach with Freedom Nutrition Coaching. Hi everyone, I am Lorianne. I am the host of Bleep Bulimia, and today I'm so pleased to have Coach Jonathan McLernon, and he is with Freedom Nutrition Coaching. And thank you so much for being here with me today.
Hey, thank you for having me. I love what you're doing with the podcast. I think it's a fascinating conversation, and that's why I reached out.
I'm very pleased you did. So my first question will be, give us an overview of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I've had quite a varied background. At University of Victoria, I was a nanotechnology researcher, so I was in chemistry, but I also studied marketing psychology for some strange reason. Ended up being a marine engineer in the Navy, and then left the Navy because being in the military is just a really tough life when you're trying to be married. So I'm a four-time entrepreneur with two failed businesses, and I've also spent a period of time as a globe-trotting English teacher. So my wife and I spent 3 years traveling around the world. We've lived in 7 countries, visited 45 countries in 5 continents. But so during my travels, we lived in South Africa for a period of time, and I went through a traumatic incident there. And as a result of that, I ended up using food to medicate my trauma, and I gained a significant amount of weight and actually became morbidly obese. And so that kind of began my own journey of trying to heal my relationship with myself and my body, because prior to going through an experience like that, I would have thought that anyone that was, say, overweight, for example, was just lazy or undisciplined. But when I started using food as a coping mechanism, because I really didn't have the tools to deal with my trauma, I kind of found myself wading into the murky world of, like weight loss and diet culture. And I would say, like, after a lot of like failed attempts, really at losing weight, wasting a lot of time and energy on the wrong things, I finally found a coach who shone a light on the glaring problem that was staring back at me. And that was really my relationship to myself. I'd become very angry and spiteful towards my body, and it was almost like I was repeatedly trying to punish it into submission. And really, he worked with me to heal my relationship with myself, and by extension with food. And it was like this paradigm shift that I could actually treat myself with self-compassion and actually become healthy. And it really changed how I work with people, even as a coach, because now I could at least relate and understand the struggles that they were experiencing, because I'd been trapped in this struggle for a number of years.
That's very interesting. And it's true. And I do believe that what we're talking about off camera in regards to that, this is very close to what, bulimics go through as well. And you hear a lot of my clients and my, some of the guests that come on where there is that self-loathing or dislike, and then of course the, very common term today is, not feeling good enough. Perfectionists wanting to be perfect to everybody.
A lot of cognitive distortions. Where and for those who might not be familiar with the term, like a cognitive distortion is really just a very distorted perception of reality. I'll give you an example of one. Let's say if I was to get a headache and then think, oh my gosh, I've got a brain tumor. That's quite an extreme leap in terms of cognitive distortion, and I experienced a lot of those. Another one might be like overgeneralizing, like I always do this, I'm such an idiot, whenever I make a mistake and so on. And so I've become really fascinated by the brain and how our brain works, because ultimately I think it's actually the driver of our behavior. And so in our efforts to become healthy, a lot of attempts take an outside in approach, like I need to fix like what I'm eating, or I need to exercise more and so on. But they fail to acknowledge like our internal environment. So that would be like our emotions, our mindset, our psychology, our habits that really powerfully influence our behaviors and ultimately our results. And so you touched on something really interesting when you said this, I'm not good enough. So that can actually, first of all, it can stem from very early on in life, where we might have been conditioned in a sense that as we are, we're not good enough. So we have to change who we are to try to fit in, because human beings are really, in a sense, we're sort of these herd creatures. But that becomes an internalized sense of identity. And now our brain wants to live that out and prove it to be true repeatedly. We call that cognitive bias. It's a bit of a simplification, but essentially we're trying to live out that identity on repeat. And that's sometimes what drives these different behaviors, because they're taking place at like a subconscious or an unconscious level.
Yeah, it's funny too, because you were saying that we had such a nice chat before this. So it was great. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, again, some of my clients that I have, I mean, I know that, and no disrespect to the therapist, but there are some,
Mhm.
she says, she's helping me with my eating. But I said, but is she helping you on the deeper level? Like
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
putting a bandage on something that's it's coming from deeper within.
Yeah. And it's if we want to create like transformation, because I work with clients and I say like we're working on transforming you. We're not going like if I could use the term diet, the idea behind diet and diet culture is I will temporarily change my behavior to get permanent results. So I'll only change my behavior until I achieve this certain result, and then I'm going to go back to whatever I was doing before. But ultimately, it's like if we want to create a healthy way of living, we have to create permanent change. And we can really only create that by establishing a new pattern of behaviors, a new pattern of habits, and really a new sense of identity. We're actually able to do this because the brain has this marvelous property called neuroplasticity. That's our brain's ability to rewire itself. And an example you might see is if you've ever known someone in your life who's had a stroke and perhaps lost the ability to speak or to walk or so on, and then they relearn that ability. That is just about a miracle. But that's because the part of the brain that suffered the stroke is dead. It's not coming back. That tissue's gone. So what the brain has done is it's wired around it and created new connections. That's how that's how powerful our brain is.
I speak out to that. My father had
Yeah.
3 strokes in 1 year in 1983. He is now
Ooh.
89 years old, and he was 83 at that time. Sorry, it was in 2013. And he does have aphasia. So that is what it's called. There's more people with aphasia than Parkinson's, and most people don't even know when you say, my dad has aphasia, what is that? And so it's
Yeah.
not commonly known, but it is very common. Uh, Definitely with stroke and trauma. And the first time that it was a light one, and yes, he got his speech back. By the third one, it was a lot more difficult because
Yes.
of
True.
that. But he's still, able to communicate and gets really frustrated when he can't say a word. And
Yeah.
it's frustrating too because his memory's all there. My mom
Yeah.
says, oh my gosh, his memory's better than mine. He's the one who's always reminding me of things. And then that's the other thing too. They get and I don't want to go too long with this, but it's something, thank you for letting me share it.
Absolutely.
When they go out there, my dad's biggest frustration is that because of his disability to speak properly, they think he's stupid.
Yeah.
Right? They automatically assume that, oh, you've got a mental problem, and it's not a mental problem, it's a speech problem. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a total like disconnect, and I can only imagine like my heart goes out to him. Like I'm an empath. And so I'm just imagining I mean I love my brain. I love communicating clearly. And I can only imagine the sense of frustration I would feel if in my head I'm forming all these things I want to share and from my mouth out comes it
Mhm.
would it would just feel so trapped in one sense. And so
Yeah, and you
I'm
can't, and he can't type, he can't write.
yeah.
So there's literally, you could say, well, if you can't speak, well, then maybe you can write it out. He can't even do that. So that is
Yeah.
really being locked in your head. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really really difficult thing to experience. But I appreciate you sharing that too because it does shine a light on it, on kind of that difficulty. But and I just wanted to highlight how powerful our brains can potentially be. And he was 83 when you said the first one happened. So to be here at 89 and still like functioning despite that happening is quite marvelous. And so I kind of wanted to give people, and that maybe that's a way to almost give people hope. Like it is sad to sort of think about the frustration, but it also can give people hope that like you're not you're not necessarily hopeless because you might be stuck in a pattern of behavior that feels inescapable. Like I've struggled with binge eating, and it was a way for me to kind of medicate my trauma because I didn't know what to do. And rather than turn to drugs or alcohol, I turned to food because it's cheap and more socially acceptable. And there were times where I just felt so trapped and like out of control. Why can't I stop doing this? I know it's not helping me, but I just, it was a compulsion. And I wonder if there's some experience that might be shared, there a common experience between those who have bulimia and someone like myself who struggle with binge eating and food addiction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is an addiction. of some sort, and definitely, and it's there, and the food's there, right? You have it in your fridge all the time. And
Yeah.
I mean, in bulimia, it was a little bit difficult because you kind of like, if you binge in front of somebody and they look at you and go, how are you still so slim? You just kind of, you have to hide it and lie.
Right. Yeah. Like navigating the social aspect to that
Mm.
is, boy, that's got to be a real challenge. For myself, I covered it up with this identity of the jolly fat guy. Yeah. So I adopted that as my identity, to sort of justify my gross. I don't say gross and disgusting, but just massive overeating. Really, that was how I would justify. I'm the jolly fat guy. I love to do this. I really didn't love myself in that condition, but I didn't know what else to do, and maybe that points to another thing and that is, when we find ourselves stuck like this, it can be incredibly difficult to show ourselves compassion. And I would say, like, if I had treated any of my friends or family the way that I treated myself, I don't think I'd have anybody left in my life. They would have all left me, and justifiably so. And yet, because we can't run away from ourselves, we can fall into this pattern.
Yeah, self-sabotage. Uh,
Yeah.
I was always saying, when I had my bulimia, there were quite often, like, there's triggers, right? And I'd love you
Yeah.
to speak a little bit more about how you came to, have a better relationship with your food. But those triggers could be even like anger at somebody, but you don't want to lash out at them. So you're internalizing it and you go to food. And I used to say, it sounds really kind of gross, but if I was angry at someone, I would eat them up, then throw them up. Like, it was like almost like this
Yeah.
ritual of here you go. Yeah.
And then like, yeah, release it from your body in a
Yes.
sense. And to me, I say that's fascinating, because it's like a physical manifestation of like an emotional process, or like a process that's happening, metaphysical, we could say, really, because it was something that's happening inside you that we can't measure in terms of the emotions. But it's, boy, like, now I'm visualizing it, like, that is fascinating. It's almost, and in one sense, maybe it would almost feel good, would it? Would there be like almost like a little bit of a release, sort of having the ability to do that?
Yeah. And that's what's so horrible. And that's what made it, so difficult to give up, because, and like I said, like, giving it up, when I finally decided to, strangely enough, it was very quick, but dealing with my emotions took months to be able to do, and not running to the
Yeah.
fridge to eat them and throw them up.
Yeah. And really, so there's a lot of crossover between bulimia and binge eating, really, because it's the only difference is I wasn't throwing up the food that I was eating. I was just saying, if it's going to go to my waste, and I was trying to bury my feelings in food. And so, in thinking about, like, how do we sort of take back that control? Because I wonder if in your experience, maybe in others' experiences, there's a sense of feeling out of control, like feeling compulsion to do this, where in your prefrontal cortex, the logical part of your brain, you know that this behavior doesn't make sense. It's hurtful to me. But the behavior is not coming from this part of your brain. It's coming from back here, the primal part of your brain, the part that says, I feel horribly uncomfortable and I only know one solution.
That's
For me,
interesting.
yeah, for me, that was food. So a logical part of my brain knew that this overeating is not helping me. I knew it. And this can also create this sense, for me, it created a sense of frustration. I would say, like, how can I know that this is hurtful? How can I know this is not good and this is harming me, and yet I can't seem to stop doing this? So, but why that happens is because it's coming from two different parts of the brain. And so that's where we want to create this sense of self-compassion. So compassion is not a get out of jail free card. In other words, it doesn't say all behavior is good, acceptable, or okay, and it doesn't absolve people from poor behaviors. But it says it's recognizing the humanity in our experience, the struggle that we face, that there is this tension between, we have like a primal nervous system, that's really hardwired to avoid discomfort. And so binge eating was a way to kind of bury discomfort. But we have, could we say, our identity, the essence of who we are? Maybe we could say our soul. this human part of us that we want to grow, we want to develop, we want to grow into these wonderful human beings. But growth is uncomfortable. And so if we lack kind of the resilience to sit with discomfort, for me, I lacked the resilience to be able to sit with my difficult emotions from trauma. And so I would just smother them in food, essentially, and so on. And so in sharing that, where I'm steering towards is that compassionate awareness can become a powerful step for change. So becoming aware of our behaviors first, and maybe not just aware of the behavior, but you mentioned the word triggers. So becoming aware of what makes a behavior happen. So I have kind of like what I call like a mental tool called F.A.S.T. And maybe it's not the best term because it's not actually referring to abstaining from food, but it's dealing with uncomfortable urges. So F stands for feel. And really what we want to do here is if we can just take a moment and say, where in my body am I feeling this? Because emotions typically have a physical location in the body. It's really interesting. For me, I also live with anxiety and depression. And thankfully, I'm able to manage it through lifestyle primarily. And I'm also able to communicate when I'm at a different, when I'm sort of in a more depressive state versus a high energy state. I'm able to communicate that with my wife. She knows how to navigate that as well. But if I start to feel anxious, I actually start to feel it in the back of my neck. That's where I feel it. But for other people, it might be a tightness in the chest or a pit in their stomach. So F is for feel. Where in my body do I feel it? So we close our eyes and we can almost like try and see, like, where am I feeling the sensation in my body? You might even say, does it have a shape? Does it have a color? How big does it look when I close my eyes? So really starting to tune into it. A is for acknowledge. And that really is accepting the fact that as human beings, we're going to experience difficult emotions. And those difficult emotions, it's not, something isn't necessarily wrong when we experience a difficult emotion. Because I wonder, especially in this more modern age, especially in an age of like sort of digital media that shows people's highlight real lives, if we start to wonder if there's something wrong when we experience a difficult emotion. But if we could instead treat that emotion like a check engine light, that little yellow light that comes on your dashboard, what it's doing is it's saying there's something that needs your attention. But emotions it doesn't tell you exactly what it is. It just says something needs your attention. Now, for me, binge eating was maybe the equivalent of taking a piece of black electrical tape and putting that across that check engine light and covering it up so I couldn't see it. It's still there. And if it goes untreated, like you're, in the engine scenario here, like this could result in catastrophic failure of the engine. And sort of in human beings, it could result in really potentially catastrophic or very harmful behaviors. So A is really about acknowledge, that this is a part of my human experience to have difficult emotions. And when we learn to sit with them, even for a short period of time, we discover that we're probably more resilient than we might give ourselves credit for. That yes, it's uncomfortable, but we are stronger. So the S stands for speak. And speak, it might be verbally out loud, or it might be writing something on paper, but it's really about producing language. And so that's why I say either out loud or writing it down versus just thinking about it in your head. Trying to put words to what your experience is. What am I feeling? Where did this come from? And when we do that, it's almost like we can take it out of our head and bring it into the real world. And now we can sort of see it for what it is, instead of our brain kind of spinning up into this cycle of catastrophizing and making it, I call it the fuzzy monster in our head. So an example of that would be, if you've ever watched a scary movie, they show you glimpses of the monster, but they don't show you the whole thing. And that's deliberate, because what they're doing is they're priming you. They know that the imagination is far bigger than anything they could produce on screen. And so by showing you glimpses, your head will start to create bigger and bigger versions of it. And so, but it becomes a sort of undefined monster until at the end of the movie, you see in its entirety what the monster is. And you realize, like, yes, that's scary. But now that I can see exactly what it is, it's now defined. It's no longer this fuzzy concept in my head. Now we can figure out how to solve it. So I call it concept the fuzzy monster in my head. Well, in this context, putting words to it, or the S for speak, is really about putting some definition around what our experience is. So just putting some words to it. And then T is really simple. It's just time. So if we can recognize that the intensity of an urge or emotion, the most intense part of that wave will only last about 7 to 10 minutes. Now, obviously, emotions can last for longer than that, but the most intense part that feels like if I don't do something, my head's going to explode, will only last about 7 to 10 minutes. And so if we can put a little bit of time between ourselves and then acting on the impulse, it's more likely that either we avoid the urge, or even if we do act on the urge, it's going to be less harmful than if we just acted impulsively off the bat. So just recognizing. So in summary, F is for feel, A is for acknowledge, S is for speak, and T is for time. And that's one of the ways that we can navigate these difficult experiences. And there's also been a term given to it called urge surfing. And it's really about just being able to sit with that urge, that uncomfortable urge, for a period of time. Now, I will say, when it comes to the time piece, don't set a timer for 10 minutes and then sit on your hands and try to white knuckle your way through it. Don't even set a timer. Just know that this will pass within 7 to 10 minutes and go do something else. This is the one time I might say, pull out your phone, play a game, go for a walk, hug somebody, talk to somebody, connect with another human being, rather than just sitting there trying to white knuckle your way through it, because that's probably a guaranteed way to failure, is trying to white knuckle our way through anything difficult that we're experiencing.
Yeah, because you're going to overthink it. I mean, that's one thing. My son, we were talking about that. I did not know. I kind of figured, but he was going through anxiety, and I told him I have anxiety as well. I did have depression at one time too in my 20s, and I'm glad I did it. I did when I was young, because I got to deal with things better as I got older. But my anxiety still comes and goes. 8 years I didn't have it, but then COVID kind of brought it back again a little bit.
Yeah.
But he was saying that. He says, Mom, I have anxieties. And he goes, thanks a lot. It's because of you. He says, my knees. I don't even know. But those are awful too, because sometimes you could wake up in the morning. Like right now, my anxiety is I'm moving, and like this is my 26th move, and it's kind of a forced move. So I'm very happy where I'm going to, but it's the packing thing. Yeah. So that I know what my anxiety is. But for a while there, I would wake up, no idea. Like there's no clue as to what it is. So you overthink things. And my son said, Mom, I overthink as well. Thanks a lot. It's because of you.
Yeah. So
everything's because of me.
Yeah. Well, maybe I could share just a little bit of my own experience that might be helpful for those out there with anxiety. So I had my first panic attack in 2016, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what was happening. It didn't occur to me that I was having a panic attack, but my heart rate spiked, and my brain was screaming like, you're going to die. You have to go call 911. You have to go to the hospital and all of this. But a part of my brain knew this isn't real. And again, it's that really interesting thing, because it's two different parts of the brain. The logical part of the brain goes, this isn't real, but it doesn't matter. It's being overwhelmed by these powerful hormones and feelings and emotions that are much bigger than our sort of the cognitive functioning part of our brain. But and we did try a couple of medications, but ultimately for myself, it led me to feeling like a zombie. And I felt like it was worse to have 12 hours like a zombie than it was to deal with an anxiety episode. And so I felt like I would rather go through a 45-minute anxiety episode, because I knew that was going to come to an end, because we couldn't, like, your body can't sustain that level of alarm response for very long with anxiety. But I think one of the worst parts was fearing when the next one was going to come. So one of the things that helped me, well, actually, there's a couple of things. One was becoming militant about my sleep. Militant about getting sleep. And my wife thankfully was on board with this. And I said, look, I have to prioritize getting this sleep, because I need to bring my nervous system rest. I cut out all stimulants. So cut out all coffee. I drink decaf now, but I cut out all coffee, anything else, even chocolate, because chocolate contains a stimulant similar to caffeine. I can now eat chocolate again, thankfully, but and then I learned how to meditate. And meditation is a lot simpler than we might make it out to be. Like, it's not, humming in a temple or a monastery in the Himalayas. It's really just a breathing exercise. that allows us to activate our parasympathetic nervous system. That's the calm part of our nervous system. And to calm down the sympathetic part, that's the fight or flight part of our nervous system. And so my first aid breathing rhythm was 4-7-8. 4 seconds in, 7 seconds hold, 8 seconds out. That very slow pace, controlled pace of breathing would bring down the anxiety that I was experiencing. So it would calm down, and it would activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So it used to take me sometimes multiple tries and maybe 10 or 15 minutes of practicing this breathing rhythm and coming back to this breathing rhythm and so on to be able to bring myself down. But I did it enough times that I could eventually do it in less than a minute. So but the best time to learn this breathing rhythm is not when you're in the middle of an episode. It's the best time to learn it is when you're calm, because you want your brain to connect calm to this breathing rhythm, not I have to calm down with this breathing rhythm. And so I would practice every day for 3 minutes a day, just this 4-7-8 breathing rhythm. And my mind used to be racing with all these thoughts, but I would gradually learn how to not attach on every thought and chase it down the rabbit hole. I could actually develop this visualization where I'd wrap the thought in a bubble and I'd float it out the side of my head. And so learning how to meditate can be frustrating because we're like, I can't get my mind quiet. And it probably took me 3 or 4 months before I learned how to do that. But that's okay. Meditation is not about a blank mind. It's about having one focus. And for me, it was counting. So just learning whenever my mind wandered to go back to 4-7-8. That's what I'm counting. Let's bring it back to that. And I used an app called Insight Timer, and I would just put on like some calming, like maybe a bubbling creek or ocean waves coming in or something like that in the background. So that's kind of how I started to navigate anxiety and deal with some of these difficult things I was experiencing. I really had to calm the nervous system down.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I do have a meditation tape that I will play at night if my brain starts to go too much. And I can't remember his last name, but his name is Mel. And I bought it off of him, and his voice and just that whole meditation. And he has you basically imagine anything that's bothering you. First, he says, write it down.
Yeah.
Before you go to bed, if there's anything. And then anything that's troubling you into a bubble and float up, and you can vision it. I swear that it's about 20 minutes to listen to. I don't think that I ever really get that far. I fall asleep within the 5 minutes or whatever.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
But it really does help. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's one of the ways. And I thought maybe it'd be helpful to come back and chat a little bit about this kind of self-compassion piece as well, and just in terms of our experience. And one of the reasons I was afraid to show myself compassion is because I was afraid that if I did, I would, like, quote unquote, let myself off the hook, and I would continue in this unhealthy pattern of behavior. The other part of it was really, I was afraid that in order to show myself compassion, I had to make myself aware of my behaviors instead of trying to bury my behaviors. So I actually had to acknowledge my imperfection. I had to acknowledge that I have this undesirable pattern of behavior in my life. And that was really, really uncomfortable. I was able to do that because I was working with a really good coach. But for me, and I think for every human being, the process of change is one where we become vulnerable and we become uncomfortable. So something like bulimia, this is a well-established pattern of behavior that, while it's harmful, it's also familiar. It's actually a part of our comfort zone, interestingly. So to change, we have to step out of our comfort zone and to become vulnerable. Well, if we feel afraid or triggered or alone or isolated in this experience, we're not going to be successful. Our primal brain will push us back into our comfort zone where at least it's familiar and feels like it's safe. So when connecting with a coach, because one of our biggest fears, sort of as human beings, our primal fears, is really like being alone and being isolated and away from the tribe and so on. That primally sort of represents a threat to our existence. So in connecting with a coach, he created this space for me to connect to him, so I felt safe in his presence. Because of that, it became safe to be vulnerable, to express my weakness and so on, and I wasn't doing this alone. And that's where the value of a coach can be, is it becomes safe to be vulnerable. And so I explain to my clients when I work with them I will never use your mistakes as ammunition against you. I will never use them to judge you, shame you, guilt you, or coerce you, because those do not work to create permanent change. I will hold the space for us to ask the questions, to safely explain what happened and understand why it happened. And ultimately, we can also come to understand it's not just because of some character flaw, because you're dumb or because you're lazy or because you're weak or anything like that. All behavior has an explanation. And so if we can figure out why it's happening, we're less likely to sort of turn on ourselves and beat ourselves up and abuse ourselves as a result of the behaviors that we're feeling sort of controlled by.
Yeah, I like that. They and you're right. And in the case of, I mean, in your case, it would be probably the same thing. With me, the lying part of it was going against my values. So obviously that's the difficult thing. So I did note that. But when you're with somebody who's helping you, you can be totally honest. And that's so great. And it's hard. I mean, I keep saying to people, you're perfect with your imperfections. That's what makes everybody who they are. And my daughter always says to me, she goes, Mom, be kind to yourself, be kind to yourself. She graduated from psychology. So she's
yeah.
oh my gosh. But you do have to be kind to yourself. And just quickly to that note, I've spoken to this before in other episodes. When I decided to quit, it was partially because my sister, I was living with her for a little while after I'd lost my business, because I'm a failed person too, a few times around business.
Yeah.
So I was staying with her for a little while, right?
Yeah.
And that's very difficult to deal with too, because you feel like a failure and everything. But then I realized, like, I don't have any excuse when she says, well, I know you're still doing it. I could hear you, and she goes, but I love you. And I hope that you can stop. Well, within no time I did. But at one time, when I moved out, I called her up. I go, I feel like having a binge attack. I feel like having a binge attack. And she says, she goes, well, she says, don't be like, just be kind to yourself. And if you do, just let me know. We can walk through this. And, I'm here for you, even if you do.
Yeah.
And I always laugh because I thought, well, that was reverse psychology. I thought, what, I'm allowed to? You're letting me? Then I'm not going to. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, now I just want to give her a hug. I'm like, just this thought of like, I'm here for you, even if you do this. Like, oh, that's so powerful.
Yeah.
Like, I will not abandon you, even if you make this choice that hurts you.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, I know that you don't want to. And, I thought to myself many times over, I can stop mid binge. And I started to become able to. So because there was a sense of like victimhood. So I felt like I'm in the grips of binge eating. It controls me. And when I realized that I actually have the ability, even mid binge, to stop, there was like this shift that I'm not a helpless victim. Yes, I'm like in a wrestling match, but I'm not actually overmatched. I do have the ability. And so I shifted this mindset from like the victim mindset to one like, no, I actually have the ability to take back control from this. It didn't mean that it was easy, but it was this shift from like, I'm helpless means I'll never win the fight, to this realization, you know what, like the human brain is amazing. The humans are amazing. I actually have the ability to take back control from this. And just that hope like shifted me from feeling like a stuck victim to, no, I'm going to do the work to move past this because I can.
That's nice. So with you, when you worked through the trauma, and how did that work with your relationship with food? So, I mean, there had to been some transition there. I'm just curious, because I know we were talking about that. You have to fix the issue. How did that work with how you started eating and such?
Yeah. First thing was really I think I had to start to heal my relationship with myself before I could start to heal my relationship with food. And I said the question that changed my life was October 2017. My coach, he asked me, he said, Jonathan, if you make a list of all the things you love and value, how far down that list do I go before I see your name? Yeah. So that was this huge paradigm shift for me, because he was giving me permission to put myself on the list of things I love and value, because I wasn't even on that list. That was the part of it. It had not entered my, it didn't really like not entered my sphere of consciousness that I was allowed to be something that I love and value. I was allowed to love myself and value myself. So it was this huge shift from like, and it didn't mean that like overnight I started to love myself, but now I'd seen a different perspective. I could move towards that one, because really I'd been like, I'm not worthy of love. I'm not good enough. Everybody like hates me, you know, and all of these like cognitive distortions again have me trapped. But
I'm not
so
lovable.
yeah,
That was a big one for me. I sometimes
absolutely.
still struggle with that. I have to keep saying, well, if you love yourself now, why wouldn't anybody? Not everyone's going to love you, but you are lovable. And not everyone will love me, but I am lovable.
Absolutely. And you know, the really amazing thing I'll say is like I've been married for 16 years. It'll be 16 years in December. My wife and I've been together for almost 18 years. I have the most incredible wife. Like, she is amazing. She's been with me through everything. Like, she met me when I was young. I was fit. I was athletic. You know, and she was with me when the trauma happened. She was with me when I gained all the weight. She was with me when I lost all my life savings in a business failure. All of these things, she stayed by my side through like all of it. And so really, I mean, she gets a lot of credit. But there were times in our marriage where I felt so low that I was like, you should. My wife's from Australia. You should go back to Australia. Just go back and be with your family. Like, don't be stuck with me. All I'm doing is dragging you down.
Wow.
And thankfully, she was like, no, I'm not leaving you. No, I married you. I'm here for you. That's why we're together. And it was her unwillingness to like listen to my delusions that is one of the reasons why we have such a good relationship today. She wouldn't give up on me. And so again, I think that really speaks to the power of human connection. So, but why I sort of share that is, as I started to learn how to love myself, because I realized, okay, it is possible. I am allowed to. And it's like, well, what does self-love even look like? But as I began to appreciate myself and care for myself and practice self-compassion, my relationship with her got even better, because I had more love to give. Because I wasn't now just like trying to pour from this empty glass, but I was like filling my cup. And so she was getting a better version of me, because there's another story in there that goes like, it's selfish to care for myself. And it's like, no, it's not.
No.
People get the best version of you when you care for yourself. And so it was this shift in my relationship with myself that then, as that started to heal, I then became able to not necessarily turn to food for comfort. And so I think that's really how I started to heal my relationship with food. Now, there are some practical things as well. So, for example, rarely is a binge eating episode like isolated, like just random. It's like, no, it's not. There's always going to be a trigger, but that trigger might have been like a week ago. Doesn't have to just have been an hour. It could have been a week ago. But we could kind of almost like trace back some things that have happened to us that sort of led to the breaking point where I was like, boom, I can't take this anymore. So we could get out a pen and paper. I could get out a pen and paper and just write down a few things. What do I think might have actually led to this? In the binge, things like asking the questions, well, what am I wanting this food to do for me? What do I want it to do? That sort of mindfulness or awareness. But we can also take some preemptive steps. So for me, it was things like, well, one, really prioritizing my sleep. I now have a 5-month-old, and so that gets a bit trickier. Thank you. He's a beautiful little boy. But prioritizing my sleep, that was a really, really big one. Eating in a regular rhythm. And that doesn't mean like eating every 2 hours, but just eating in a stable rhythm meant that, let's say, my blood sugar was going to be more stable. So it's less likely to have these spikes and crashes. I would kind of put, like, I call them like stop signs or roadblocks. So let's say if we went to Costco and got this, Costco-sized bag of peanut M&Ms. Don't put them on the counter where they're bright yellow, because yellow is the most visible color in the human spectrum. Bury it in my pantry. So that if I wanted to get to it, I had to move like the pickle jar and the bag of flour to get to the M&Ms. So then when I'd have the urge to go and eat them, I had to think, do I actually want to do this? Do I want to get down on my hands and knees, get there and pull these things out and pull? So that was my way of putting like a physical barrier between me and the food I was going to binge eat, so that it gave me that space to think about it. Just get my prefrontal cortex going, really. Or if I got like a big bag of chips, we'd portion it out. And again, you take it and you put it back somewhere so that there's a pause. So I can't just continually go hand to mouth. I put pauses in there where I have to stop and make a conscious decision. Do I want to get up, move, and get more food? And if I do, at least now I've made that conscious decision to do that. And so those are some of the things that I think that really helped me in a more practical sense to again start to heal my relationship with food.
I find the speed of eating is very much a part of it too. One thing I did read a book with Joan Borisenko, and it had a big impact on me. And it was about the fact that your hunger signal is 20 minutes after you eat. So,
Yes.
when you're binging and you sit there, you go, I'm still hungry. In those 20 minutes, you can just pack in. And then after the 20 minutes, you're going, this is gross.
Yeah. So,
speed. Yeah.
and here's kind of something interesting. Maybe you'll have a shared experience here. So for me, on the one hand, food represented like basically this comfort or this escape from whatever difficult emotion I was feeling. And so I badly wanted to eat these foods. And we go for it. Like I would go for what we call the high bliss foods. Like I didn't binge eat broccoli. No. Chocolate, chips, cake, cookies, pizza, ice cream, high bliss foods, ones that create, because that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to create a dopamine response in the brain. We don't think about it like that, but that's what we're trying to do. And so, yeah, now my train of thought actually went right off the tracks because I started picturing all of these foods here. But yeah, sorry, actually my train of thought did go right off the tracks.
That's okay, because you were saying that you were wondering if you could relate to this, and that's when you started talking about the different foods.
Oh, eating slowly. There we go. Thank you. Yeah. So there was this tension because I wanted to eat this food because of the comfort it gave to me. But then I felt guilty about eating the food because I knew it was a harmful type of eating, and it was contributing to me being obese, and it was contributing to me staying stuck. So there was this tension between, I want to eat this food because it makes me feel better, but I don't want to eat this food because it's keeping me obese. And so grappling between these two tensions, and the result of that would be I would motor through the food. I would just eat it as fast as possible because I wanted the food, but I wanted to erase the guilt I felt for eating the food. And so I would eat it insanely fast. So learning to eat slowly was another really powerful thing for me. And it became about truly enjoying like what I was eating. So when I didn't feel guilty about eating it, I could just take it, I remember the first time I ate a slice of pizza with a fork and a knife, and I would cut a small piece and I would just take a bite and I would chew it, and I would feel the texture of like the doughy, the pizza dough. I would taste like the spices and the tomato sauce and a little bit of the savory, pepperoni. And now I'm picturing it in my head, and the sort of the stringy cheesiness. And I was really present with that experience. I was like, that was the most amazing slice of pizza I've ever eaten. And it probably took me 10 minutes to eat that slice of pizza. In my past, I would have eaten an entire extra large pizza in under 10 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Right. But I got way more enjoyment out of taking my time savoring every bite of this piece of pizza. And at the end of it, I didn't feel like bloated and stuffed and disgusting and gross and so on. And so now I recognize that when I fall back into wanting to shovel food into my mouth, because there's still sometimes a trigger, like that's almost like a hardwired behavior pattern. I feel as though I am like I'm robbing myself of pleasure and enjoyment because eating is pleasurable. It is. And if we try to say food is just fuel, no, it's not. No, it's not. Eating is enjoyable. Food is family, it's culture, it's connection, it's history. There's so much joy and delight found in food. But I find it differently now. So it becomes about enjoying the experience rather than trying to mass consume a volume.
I totally agree with that. In fact, my daughter came to visit me, and we went out and we got a hamburger. I mean, this is the other thing too, is with when bulimics, quite often they'll say they're trigger foods. Well, they're not like, and I get that, but when you get over the traumas or whatever you went through, and and you have a relationship with food, there are no trigger foods anymore. I can still have chips, but like you, I still portion them out. I'm not going to have the bag next to me. I put some in a little bowl and I take them
Yeah.
because I know I probably, before I know it, I'll have the whole bag eaten, and then I'll
Yeah.
feel gross. So I know how many I like. I know how much will, and the craving's gone anyway after my 10 or 15 chips. But it was so nice because I said to my daughter, I said, this is so lovely to sit here and have a hamburger with you. And I didn't finish it off, but in my mind, I was sitting there going, without having, like, taking my time, enjoying my time with you, without worrying about 20 minutes before I have to go to the bathroom and look at my ugly face. And that, I mean, I think I'm
Yeah.
very pretty, but it's ugly when it's in the toilet. Okay. The toilet
Yeah.
water, that's an ugly face.
Yeah.
And without having
Yeah.
to do that, without worrying. And I thought, wow, like I know there were years that I didn't get that, but I enjoy it, I think, even more now because I was bulimic and I didn't appreciate it. And the last 11 years I've so appreciated going Christmas dinners and actually enjoying it instead of,
Yeah.
overeating and then again trying to hide from everyone to find a bathroom where nobody knows I'm going to. Like, that was just a pain in the, well, it wasn't a
Pain in
pain
the
in the
neck.
butt, but it was a pain in the neck.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's so
Yeah.
much freedom in it too, right? Because you're and enjoying the food. So yeah. And like I said to my daughter, so I ate half a hamburger. I ate it slowly. I was full. And then I had
Yeah.
the other half for dinner. But
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah, and there was like the fear of wasting food, and that was often put into us like as children, which was passed on from probably our grandparents who might have lived through the Great Depression, for example, where food was scarce, and food becomes a way that we show love. It's also an easy win, like for those who love us. Oh, if you're good, you can have a cookie. Bing. Okay, like that's an easy win. Right. I had the dearest, sweetest, great auntie. She's long gone now, but she was the sweetest lady you'd ever meet. And she had Down syndrome, and she would give us coffee crisp chocolate bars. And if we were a good boy, if I was a good boy, I would get a coffee crisp. And to this day, when I eat a coffee crisp, I think about my dear old auntie. And
association, right, of food and
yeah,
reward. That's the other
yeah,
thing too. You think about a lot of the stuff that we were binging on, like the ice cream and the chips. Those were reward foods when we were little kids.
yeah,
And now you can
yeah.
have all you want because you're an adult. You can go buy them and have them and overdo it.
We
Um,
live in a feast world, but with
yeah.
famine biology. It's yeah, it's a hard one to navigate. And I just wanted to touch on one other thing, and that is because you talked about if you put the bag of chips beside you, you'll eat the whole thing. And I go, yeah, that's exactly what they're engineered for. So we want to understand that this is what food manufacturers do. It's not necessarily to be evil, it's to sell more because that's why business exists, to earn a profit. And we produce more calories in North America than I think any other region of the world in terms of per capita. So I think I'll have to check the numbers, but I think we produce enough food to feed every human in North America uh, around 4,000 calories per day.
Wow.
So no wonder we overeat and we have all these well, yeah, like because we have so much food available to us, and we've never lived in a period of time in human history where food was so available. And then so now we have food products, they're engineered with artificial flavors and artificial sweeteners and so on, and artificial colors to make them brighter. These are all what we call super stimuli. It's not necessarily that they're these toxic carcinogens or poisons or things, but they are what we call super stimuli. So their colors brighter than we see in nature. Their flavors sweeter than we taste in natural food. They're more potent. And so it's like when you eat a Dorito, well, of course an apple is going to taste like cardboard because a Dorito is so much more of a sensory overload than eating an apple is. So we have that. And then we have like the marketing aspect of it, right? Where I say like marketers are almost playing with a cheat code because they bypass our prefrontal cortex. That's a logical part of our brain. They bypass that and go straight to the emotional part of our brain. The greatest,
Subliminal. Yes.
yeah, the greatest marketing campaign in the history, I think, in my opinion, was hungry, grab a Snickers. So simple, so memorable. And I wonder how much they paid somebody to come up with that slogan, because hungry can be a representation of any difficult feeling we have,
Yeah.
anything, because it's not always hunger that we feel, even though we feel a sensation around where our stomach is. Grab suggests act impulsively. Don't think about it. As soon as you feel uncomfortable, impulsively grab a Snickers.
Huh.
And then you eat that Snickers and boom, your brain lights up with dopamine because it's carefully engineered to do exactly that. The greatest trick that Snickers ever pulled was to convince the world they're not a candy bar, they're a meal replacement.
Oh my gosh.
That's why they're the number one selling candy bar in the world.
They had a commercial with Robin Williams in it too, didn't they?
Yeah.
I think he did
So
one. Yeah, when you're whether angry, you're not yourself.
yeah,
Grab
like
them.
just brilliant
It was
marketing.
brilliant.
So it's like be aware, be informed of what you're up against. So I have a program called Lifestyle 180, for example. And in that program, I talk about the hero mindset. So it's like healthy, educated, relentless offense. And I won't break it down in great detail, but really educated is really knowing like what you're up against. Relentless doesn't mean pedal to the metal 24/7. It just means a refusal to quit. It means every day I'm going to show up for myself. And an offense means I recognize that nobody's coming to save me. I have to make myself a priority if this is going to happen. So rather than sitting back defensively waiting for someone to come and save us, no, we go on offense and we say, I'm going to proactively, like I'm going to save myself. And so ultimately, if we want to become healthy, we have to adopt this hero mindset where I will be my own hero, essentially. And that's what I teach people.
Beautiful. This has been absolutely wonderful. I know we went a little bit over time, but this has been so exciting to go through this with you. And can you please let our listeners know where they can find you, Jonathan?
Yeah, they can find me at freedomnutritioncoach.com. Now, earlier in the episode, I mentioned that F.A.S.T. So I do, some of your listeners, I will say, like it might not be appropriate for, because I do talk about weight loss in this. And so if that's not appropriate, then I don't recommend you get this resource. But I do have a resource called Crush Your Cravings. And it is tools to help people move past their uncomfortable urges and cravings for food. So they can go to nofndiets.rocks. So that's nofndiets.rocks/crush-your-cravings. So if you put in your name and your email address, I'll just send you a copy of Crush Your Cravings. And so you'll see a little bit about my story and some other stories about how we've used the tools in here to get to where we are.
That's beautiful. That sounds, yeah, crushing your cravings. Definitely. It's
yeah,
definitely a step. And I really appreciate your story and being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much also for what you do. If I hadn't bumped into you, I wouldn't know that midlife bulimia was even a thing. And because of you having this podcast, I'm now more aware that this is even something that comes into existence. And so I think you're doing something really, really important here. I wanted to highlight that as well.
I really appreciate that. Yes, we just quickly went over that. And midlife, there's two different ones. The ones that had bulimia, like I did since I was 18, and my final year was 48 with it. So I was midlife. And then there's the other ones who are starting in their 40s because they're going through a type of different kind of puberty, menopause and all that stuff. Yeah. So, but I appreciate that. And I'm glad that you learned a little bit something from me too.
Absolutely. I love these conversations because they are so informative. So thank you again for having me.
Thanks, Jonathan. Take care. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit me at bleepbulimia.com.